Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Friday, September 23rd, 2022, and I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. Cody, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Slugfest of a Thursday night football game. Wasn't as spectacular as week two, but it was still a good game. Browns came out on top. But I just want to say thanks to you, and Snyder's not here, but thanks to you guys for holding down the fort while I missed on Monday. You guys are going to have to get used to just Tyler and George here in about a month when I go on a little hiatus. But for now, I'm back and ready to talk some fantasy football.
Yeah, this guy's going to be over having a little fun on a honeymoon in about a month, but Tyler's somewhere down south in a ranch, kind of trying to herd up some fantasy points. I don't know. I'll try to figure out where he's at and bring him back for Tuesday, but I'm sure he's going to be back over the weekend to help you guys with some advice on Twitter, as we are going to be out there on social media helping you set your week 3 lineups, as well as today, as we're going to break down every single week 3 matchup with our week 3 preview, and we're going to hit the little bit of NFL news and notes that Tyler and I missed on our Tuesday show. Make sure you catch us on our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at the Couch GMs. We're also on TikTok, thecouchgms.com, and you can join our Discord chat to chat with us instantly. The link is in the description of this video or podcast you are watching right now. This intro keeps getting longer and longer. Cody, let's
You're
just
doing
jump into
great.
NFL news. So I think I was looking at something like a minute and a half. Let's see if we can do news faster than my intro. Started off, news. Mike Evans, we talked about his suspension on Tuesday. He did appeal, and it was upheld. Mike Evans will be missing the game this weekend for the Buccaneers. Cody, any reaction fantasy-wise?
No, I think, like you guys mentioned on Tuesday, you were expecting it. It was this second altercation with Marshawn Lattimore. It was funny that Twitter was, got into a mood and they saw that John Runyon, former Eagles guy, was the guy that originally handed out this suspension, and his son plays for the Packers. They thought it was like an inside job. But Mike Evans will be out. There's some other guys we'll talk about that might not play, but we'll save that for when we do our preview.
Yes, we will. And then other news. I mean, this is going to be a really heavy news segment. Jason Pierre-Paul signs with the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens trying to add on to their pass rush. Not exactly majorly fantasy relevant unless you're playing the Ravens defense, who did have a solid week for a while last week, and then the third and fourth quarter, they absolutely fell apart.
Yeah, they still got saved by that opening kickoff touchdown. Like, points wise, they're still a top 5 fantasy defense through the first 2 weeks. It just adds some pass rushers, so if you can get some sacks, it'll help your fantasy. But like George mentioned, not too big of fantasy news. And George and Tyler did such a great job on Tuesday. Man, I'm getting my days all mixed up. That's what happens when you miss a show. That there's not a lot of news. So George, let's you know what? We're gonna roll a bumper. Let's just jump into some fantasy advice. All right, so we're back with some fantasy advice. This one came in from online, and it was great. I could relate to this one, and I wanted to get George's opinion because I'm sure if you're listening to the show, at least in one league or maybe in all your leagues, you're dealing with my team is garbage. I don't know what to do. I'm 0-2. Maybe you had Mike Evans, he's suspended. Maybe you had Elijah Mitchell as one of your top running backs and he's went down. The guys that you drafted just aren't performing. Adam Thielen's a name that hasn't been performing where we thought he might be. Those top running backs, Taylor, McCaffrey, Henry, all haven't been those elite fantasy dominant guys that we were expecting. So far, it's still early. But what do you tell somebody that's 0-2 and they're thinking about just punting on their fantasy season already?
I'm assuming we're talking about redraft and not dynasty, correct?
First, yeah, dynasties, it's whole different. Like, there's a lot of different things, but
Yeah.
redraft or even keepers, if you want to get into like that, a couple keepers, but mainly the redraft. You're like, I'll just save it for next year.
Well, okay. I'll start with keeper because number one, there's a little bit more motivation in keeper, and two, I'll give you a little success story. I wish Tyler was here to tell this one because it's actually him last year in our keeper league. He got to about week 5, week 6, and was 0-5 or 1-5 or something like that. It was one of those 2 weeks. And he decided to sell out his team for a bunch of keepers that were in good rounds for this year. Whatever happened, he ended up getting a bunch of guys who started overperforming in the second half of the year. and made a run and finished second in that league, as well as picked up a lot of capital for keepers. So his team is stacked now this year. So never be afraid to make a move. And if it happens to not work out, man, you could have a good team the next year. If not, maybe you get lucky and still make a run for that season. But that second half there can go towards, in a regular redraft league as well. You never know if some of these guys with high upside are going to get out of their slump and have a good second half. There's things out there called the waiver wire and trades that maybe you can try to find somebody who has a high name value on an Adam Thielen, and you can get a solid running back too with a little bit of a package deal there. Or like if someone's really high on someone who just got off the waiver wire, try to sell him for somebody who could be a borderline flex play. Like, don't give up, especially after 2 weeks. You basically need 7 wins to get into the playoffs in most redraft leagues. That would be 6 losses if I'm doing my math correctly. Maybe 7 now, actually, because we went up to one more extra week in the regular season. There's a long way to go. You have 5 losses still to play with. It's way too early to be giving up, but don't sit back and wait too long either. Try to make some of those trades, some of those other moves. Ask us for advice if you think it's a trade's a good idea or not, and we're here to help you.
Yeah, that's some great advice, George. And just to add a little bit more to it, like you mentioned, in our league of record, we have a 10-man league with 6 playoff spots. I feel like every year there's a team that's 6-7, or maybe 7-7 now if there's that extra week. I can't remember
Yep.
do the math in my head while I'm talking. But so you can make it in the playoffs, and a lot of times the 6 seed, because they've had the waivers they are the team to beat coming into the playoffs. And 2, I really liked his advice of, maybe go out and trade for, don't sit on the guys that you drafted. If there is a
Mm-hmm.
player out there that you really, like, or, the draft is great, but that's not where you win your fantasy league. The moves that you make now and into the rest of the season are how you can make a comeback. Maybe someone who drafted Derrick Henry is already, getting a little bit frustrated with his output. Maybe someone drafted Jonathan Taylor, is worried about injury and then saw what he did in week 2. And you can go out and get him for one of those high upside running backs, or even a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is balling out right now. There is nothing about it, but the Lions are the second highest scoring team, tied with the Chiefs, through 2 weeks. Do you think that's going to continue? Do you think that's an aberration? Can you go out and flip Amon-Ra St. Brown? So look at those players that you have on your team that you weren't expecting for, and try to, get some guys that you think will bounce back. But make moves. Don't hold on to those draft picks, and at least make the season fun. Have some fun with it. If maybe go out and get guys you just like to try to, at least change up your team and do something. So you're not just sitting there putting out the same lineup each and every week.
I love it, Cody. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot more advice. Maybe some guys that are sell high candidates. Maybe some guys you should start looking for to buy low as we get through our week 3 preview. So why don't we jump into every game from Sunday and Monday? Breaking down every week 3 game besides the Thursday game, which already happened when you're recording, but we're predicting a slugfest. Yeah. Monday. Sorry. Yeah. We're gonna start with Monday. We're going backwards. Just kidding. Sunday 1:00 games. We'll start off there with the New Orleans Saints traveling to the Carolina Panthers in a divisional game. And I'll start on the Panthers side because Christian McCaffrey yet again has popped up on an injury report. He was limited participant on Thursday with what they're calling stiffness, so he should be good to go. But I wanted to note that right off the top because I'm sure a lot of McCaffrey owners are like, oh no, here we go again.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good thing to point out. And they know how good Christian McCaffrey is. They're going to be extra precautious. And if a guy doesn't do every rep that, he's expected to do in practice, he has to go on as limited. Or even if he does every rep and there's like a nagging pain, he's supposed to be added to the injury report. So they're doing what they're supposed to. In terms of this game, like the Panthers are struggling. They've had their moments. They've been in close games. Like they've lost by 2 and they've lost by 3. Like that, so they have at least been in the games. Christian McCaffrey hasn't performed like we would like. This new stiffness could be concerning. With the Saints, they have a pretty good defense coming off of a tough loss against the Buccaneers. But on the Saints side, you're still going to have that revolving door. Week 1, it was Jarvis Landry. Not any of the wide receivers really got going in week 2. So, George, what is your order of how confident you're playing those Saints wide receivers?
That's a tough one. And as high as I was on Jarvis Landry after week one, he's kind of really fallen down my board a little bit because he was losing number one team snaps essentially to Chris Olave a lot in that game. Like, I figured they would try to get Chris Olave kind of slowly worked in the offense. He would be someone that's pretty big by the end of the season. But all of a sudden, he was getting more snaps than Jarvis Landry in week two. He had 13 targets last week, which is absolutely insane to see a rookie in week two with a team with Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry around him to get that many targets. But I think now my order of operations in New Orleans, Michael Thomas is still probably your safest guy. He's still like a quarterback's best friend, essentially, with those hands, runs a lot of short routes, just gets open. Chris Olave is now my two, and Jarvis Landry is my three.
I would probably agree with that. If you're in a full point PPR, I might switch Landry to 2 with Olave 3, but I think they're still pretty close. But sticking with the Saints, Alvin Kamara was limited in practice both Wednesday and Thursday, and will remain to see if he is going to play after not playing on last Sunday against the Buccaneers. If he's back, he can be right back in your lineups. That shouldn't be an issue. If he's not, I mentioned it in the start sit article on the couchgms.com. Make sure you check that out. But if not, you can play Mark Ingram. I was concerned. I talked about it last week on the podcast, but he dominated the carries. They didn't have a lot of opportunities to run. He only ran the ball 10 times, and that was still like 80% more than everyone else. But he averaged
Mm-hmm.
6 yards of carries. So maybe they should have gave the ball to him a little bit more. So he still has a little bit of juice, a better matchup. If Alvin Kamara doesn't go, you can pivot to Mark Ingram. Maybe check your waiver wire to make sure he's not sitting there. But if not, if Kamara does go, you're definitely not then going to play Mark Ingram.
And yeah, just to back up a little bit more, Tampa Bay's defense is a lot stronger than Carolina's. Carolina doesn't exactly have
100%.
a turnstiles defense, but that's probably your toughest or one of your top three toughest against the running back if I had to just think in my head really quick. So it's tough to see a backup running back, even of Mark Ingram's, style to do well against the Buccaneers.
And I mean, in yards per carry, at least he did. So that's why I
Yeah.
think you can be if Kamara is out, you can play Mark Ingram. But on the Panthers side, we hit on them a little bit. I still think DJ Moore, another underperformer that we were expecting, but I think with him being the number one, you're probably still going to roll him out there unless you have a lot of young guys that you've picked up. Or is there anyone on the waiver wire from this week? Are you playing a Garrett Wilson already over DJ Moore, or is he too talented not to have in your lineup?
I'm not playing him over a DJ Moore. I was actually going to ask you what your thoughts were on a Robbie Anderson a little bit, because I know out of week one there was so much hype of like he's going to be the guy leading this team in targets now because it looks like they just like the offense wants to work around him, and he did come back down to earth, had about the same exact game as DJ Moore did last week. Is there any thoughts about him? But I will say I'm still playing DJ Moore over those waiver wire guys just because he's too talented. Just to answer your question before I move through.
Yeah, I'm right there with the same thing on still playing DJ Moore. And then Robbie Anderson, he is flexible depending on the matchup. The Saints aren't the best matchup, so I'd probably look elsewhere. Um, you know, we'll probably hit on some guys that we can, this guy or Robbie Anderson. But right now I would probably pivot away from Robbie Anderson and look elsewhere as a flex option.
Yeah, just to throw that example out there, the whole Garrett Wilson or Robbie Anderson, I'm playing Garrett Wilson.
That one's still tough for me because I still really like Elijah Moore. And
But so just okay. I mean, we can move to the Jets game out of this, so we could just go. We're gonna go Bengals Jets next. But the Elijah Moore versus Garrett Wilson thing, I feel like that's gonna change when the quarterback changes.
I
And
was
I
going to say
kind of
the exact
mentioned
same
that in
thing.
my waiver. I kind of mentioned that in my waiver wide article too. Like, I think Garrett Wilson still got another week here where like Flacco seems to like him. He is still a very talented rookie. It's not like that shouldn't be a flash in the pan kind of game. But it seems like Zach Wilson and Elijah Moore had a good thing going before Elijah Moore got hurt the end of last year. When he comes back, I have a hard time believing that he's not going to be looking a little closer at Elijah Moore than he is Garrett Wilson. But if the offense gets moving, there's a chance both of them are relevant. I mean, it's tough that Jets offense isn't great, but I would still think the offense is going to shift to Moore once Wilson's back. Zach
Yeah,
Wilson's back. I feel like I have
I
to
tend to think
specify that here.
Yeah, I tend to think you might be onto something with that. And I think it's also worth noting that Zach Wilson is expected to make his return in week 4. He's ramping up his practice this week and then looking to make his debut in week 4. So we'll keep you all updated with that on next week. But let's talk about their matchup this week. As George mentioned, they are facing the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe the most surprising team in the first 2 weeks of the season after now starting
Not in a
0
good
and
way.
2. I think they're fine. Like, I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to echo what Joe Burrow said. It's still early. I know they were like really hyping up like no one that started 0 and 2 last year made the playoffs. Um, Now that they expanded to 7 teams, I think the Bengals can still do it. I think it takes a while for offensive line to gel, and they're going to eventually get there because they have 4 new pieces on their offensive line. So they'll get there. They'll get better. Um, and the one guy I do like, although he was on the injury report, that is Hayden Hurst. I think he is carving out a role for him at the tight end position, which is scarce. He hasn't put up a ton of points. He hasn't found the end zone, which that I think that will elude him this week. Um, but I think Hayden Hurst is not replacing Tyler Boyd as the number 3 option, but getting very close to Tyler Boyd as the number 3 option. Like some weeks it'll be Boyd, some weeks it'll be Hurst, and just that security blanket, that quick outlet pass for Joe Burrow. So if Hurst is good to go and he practiced full on Thursday, I really like him as a streaming option this week.
Yeah, I mean, at least a dartboard candidate if you have another guy who you kind of like that's on that fringe. But if there's any team that you can get right against, I know the Jets are better this year, but the Jets are pretty high on that list of teams you can get right against. Like, if they can keep Burrow upright even a little bit, I don't see any problem with playing any of your typical Bengals, your Joe Mixon, your Jamar Chase, your T. Higgins. I mean, I would not go as far as streaming Tyler Boyd. I think in this matchup traditionally, I'd be like, yeah, Tyler Boyd might be a flex, but since they're struggling, I'm avoiding it. But this is that good of a matchup that like you should technically think in that. So I would have no problem with any of your typical Bengals.
Yeah, and I also one, the Jets did beat the Bengals last year in uh MetLife. Excuse me, in MetLife.
Ooh,
I
take a
think Mike
sip.
White
Should
was
have a
the
drink
starter.
there.
Yeah, I probably should get a drink, but I think they're gonna come. They're gonna be coming off of a high after that big game that they came back on when they shouldn't have won. Um,
Yeah.
I think they're going to be. There might be a little bit of a slow start. It'll really let the Bengals get cooking, and I think the Bengals will bounce back this week. But I am going to ask you, and I'm probably going to ask you this every week. I'd ask Snyder if he was here: Brees Hall or Michael Carter?
I think this week I'm going to lean Brees Hall since I feel like he should be more used in the passing game than Michael Carter. And like you said, I'm expecting the Bengals to get up. The Jets have to play from behind. They'll go to the young little spark plug to try to get them some work. But again, both of them really being used. And you're still in that window where if you're desperate enough to have to start a Michael Carter, whether it be in a keeper, a dynasty, even in a redraft, if you have some like guys like J.K. Dobbins going on with you right now, you're still in that window. You can play him, but I think that window is going to start slowly closing like it has been.
All right. Well, you mentioned J.K. Dobbins, so let's talk about the Ravens. J.K.
Okay.
Dobbins is back at practice, but are you trusting him? And they're facing the New England Patriots. I
Yep.
don't think I mentioned that. They're facing the New. Are you trusting him in your lineup? I said last week if he played, I still wouldn't play him, and I'm in the same boat this week. I need to see it. I need to make sure this isn't. Let's get him 10 carries and see how he reacts. Like I need to see J.K. Dobbins on the field a full game before he's in my fantasy lineup. How about you?
I'm gonna bring up one of the debates we had last week because it's against the Patriots here, and we got J.K. Dobbins versus Damian Harris is one of the matchups there we debated last week. I kind of like that even though like he hasn't seen any action, he's getting full participation in practice. I think they're really just taking it slow with J.K. Dobbins. He should still technically be progressing. Like if he should be better this week than if he played last week. You know what I mean? Even though he hasn't
All
gotten
right.
any game action. So I'm giving him just like the little minuscule bump over where I had him last week. So I would lean J.K. Dobbins very, very slightly in that, but I don't think there's really a determining factor to go one way or the other. I really hope you're not in a situation where you're like, I'm desperately have to play him. But if I think he has enough upside that you can hope if you need it. It's a much better situation than in week one, whereas like if he played in week one, I didn't think he was going to get any carries. I think they've been waiting long enough now that when they get him in there, they want him to at least shoulder a bit of a workload. Even if he gets 10 carries, he can still make something out of 10 carries, especially if he snatches a touchdown or something like that.
All right, but to answer your question, if we're going to go back to last week, I played Damian Harris over J.K. Dobbins. There is not a lot of guys that I would play over J.K. Dobbins. I understand the upside, but until you see it, it's a massive injury to come back from. It has me worried. I mean, even look at Cam Akers. He came back, not the same injury, obviously, but he came back and he still isn't back to normal, despite starting playing last year. He's looking better, but that's why I have to see it with him. On the
Okay.
Patriots side, though, I know you talked about Nelson Aguilar had a kind of a big game against the Steelers last week, but Jacoby Myers still seems to be the solid option if you need a flex guy. Uh, Touchdowns don't like to come his way, which is always scary with starting Jacoby
Yeah.
Myers. But he gets the targets and the opportunities, and eventually it will revert to the mean, and he will find the way to the end zone.
I mean, I know you don't like comparing players, but I feel like the comparison between Jacoby Myers and Miles Sanders last year is the perfect comparison. And Sanders is finally starting to get touchdowns. He got touchdowns in the first 2 weeks of the season. So that shows you it's going to regress to the mean. And I want to be ahead of that boat. And I am so tired of the buying in for 2 weeks on Nelson Aguilar and then having to pull it back because he doesn't keep it consistent. So just to back myself up here again, yeah, I like Jacoby Myers better. And but would you play him in a lineup this week? Like, where's your line on that?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably right there. We talked about Robbie Anderson at the top with our first matchup. I would probably play Jacoby Myers, little dramatic pause there, over Robbie Anderson. Very close, very similar players. Um, but just how I view them. So if you're in, a 12 team double flex, or if you're in a 14 team, or even if you've had some injuries, maybe, you went heavy on running backs but you had Mike Evans and he's suspended this week. So you're kind of, pivoting to try to find a guy like Jacoby Myers is a safe pick. If you need high upside, don't go with him. If you want a guy that, will at least see, 8 to 12 targets, will probably have 6 catches, between 60 and 100 yards. And then the question is the touchdown. Like that's what you can expect out of Jacoby Myers. Um, but I think it's really good to compare him too with the other guys on the Ravens side. Week 1, it was Devin Duvernay. Week 2, it was
Mm-hmm.
Rashad Bateman. I mean, Mark Andrew has been a consistent, but are you in on any of those guys? Like I'd probably play Bateman out of all 3 of them, but I would play Jacoby over Duvernay. I think that's where I would at in this matchup specifically.
Yeah, and honestly, like you make it sound like Bateman had a bad week one. Yeah, he didn't have the most catches, but he still had a long touchdown. He was still very involved in the offense. Like I think Bateman is the guy that Baltimore is making their wide receiver one as valuable as being wide receiver one for Baltimore is. But you can say that, actually they've been improved a lot in passing the ball this year. Lamar is doing very well in passing stats so far this season. So we'll see if that keeps up. But no, yeah, I'm with you. It's Bateman and then Jacoby Myers and then Devin Duvernay. Devin Duvernay, I think, is going to be inconsistent. He's going to be the traditional kind of Deshaun Jackson. He's going to get some big games because he's going to get his big touchdowns. But he's also going to have the game where he disappears and has one catch, which I think was this past week. I just got lucky. The one league I had to play him in was a dynasty that also counts as return touchdowns, so I still had a pretty solid score there.
Yeah, that definitely is nice. But that's enough on that matchup. So let's move on to our next pair, which is the Houston Texans at the Chicago Bears. On the bright side, this matchup has no notable injuries. On the
Hey.
downside, it's the Houston Texans versus the Chicago Bears. So let's start with the Bears since they're the home team. Give me a 10-second synopsis on the panic button for Darnell Mooney from what Tyler said, because I know that's one of his favorites.
The Bears are really struggling to pass the ball. I'm honestly just like trying to remember exactly what he said. But at least in my opinion, the Bears are really struggling to pass the ball. None of their guys are, putting up any passing stats. I'm pretty sure Justin Fields is currently 33rd in pass attempts in the NFL. There's 32 teams. So if that tells you anything, I don't want anybody that has anything to do with the passing game in Chicago.
Yeah, you saw it on Sunday night. They really like to run the ball, and they didn't really trust Justin Fields to throw it around. And we thought maybe that was just week 1 in the Rain Bowl, but that carried over into week 2. So I'm pretty much out on all Chicago pass catchers until we see some sort of improvement. Maybe it'll be this week because the Houston Texans aren't the same caliber as the Green Bay Packers, despite having the same
And the
record.
49ers.
Right. But they did beat the 49ers, but that I'm still throwing that game out because it was a land or mudslide game.
But still,
Very
with a
hard.
win, you're going against a tough defense. So, they won, but they didn't put up stats. Between the rain and the fact that it's a good defense, yeah, this is a much more favorable weather
Gotcha.
and matchup than they've had the first 2 weeks.
For sure. But the one guy I do want to talk about is David Montgomery, because I feel like this is like the guy that George and myself have been polar opposites on.
Yep.
And I know he had a big game last week, 160 yards on the ground. But 104 of those came on one drive. Yep, think about that. 104 came on one drive of a 100-yard football field because they were going backwards enough that he was able to allow other people to get yards on the drive and still get 104. So he's still a big question mark for me. There was some defensive miscommunications. They had a corner lined up in the linebacker on that drive because they thought they were going to heave it all over the field, and they didn't. They just ran it. So that was some bad play calling on the Packers. But I digress. David Montgomery, he is another guy. I'd probably play him over J.K. Dobbins just because that's where but that's about where I'm comparing David Montgomery to. And I feel like George is a little bit higher on him than me.
I have him in a low end RB2. And a lot of it is going to go down to, I'm in between you and Tyler and Najee Harris, just for example. And your big reason for Najee Harris is volume. David Montgomery still has volume. And we were worried about it in week 1, sure, because if I go back to those stats, Khalil Herbert led the team in yards, but he had 9 carries to Montgomery 17. You go then to this Bears-Packers game, Montgomery had 15 carries, still basically kept up the same amount of carries despite them losing really bad most of the game. Khalil Herbert went down to 4. Those people out there, Khalil Herbert's taken over this run game. David Montgomery's not. It's not happening yet. It's still David Montgomery's backfield on a team that wants to prioritize the run, that has a quarterback to run the read option, to get an extra linebacker out of the box for him. Sure, he didn't have many yards besides one drive, but he could have that one drive every single game. He still had a solid game without a touchdown. The touchdowns are going to come for a guy of his kind of, running style. He's going to be a goal line guy. Eventually, they're going to get into the red zone. I'm not worried about him completely yet. Even the worst of teams, the Texans scored touchdowns last year.
Okay, valid. I'll give you that one. But speaking of the Texans, we got to talk about their players. Brandon Cooks, the dude is just solid. He can be your wide receiver too all season long, and he'll just be consistently getting you points. Might not be a lot of points, but he'll consistently get you points. I saw a stat, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but he was one of 4 players to reach the amount of receiving yards before turning 29 or something like that, because he's still super young. You just think he's old because he's been on, or maybe not super young, but been on 4 different teams. And everyone else was a star player for their team. And then you have Brandon Cooks, who's been on, like I mentioned, 4 different teams. Crazy career path, but still a solid player. But the big question for me in this matchup is Dameon Pierce. Do you trust him enough yet? Did he bounce back enough in week 2 with his opportunities to get him back in your lineup? Or are you still holding out on him?
I'm going to go back to that Bears-Packers game here just to see how the Packers did running the ball, and counting Aaron Rodgers' whole 5 carries for 10 yards, which, he's not a rushing quarterback. They still averaged 5.3 yards per carry. So their run defense, maybe not as good as we're used to the Chicago Bears run defense being. Add that onto the fact that they gave Damian Pierce all of the running back touches last week. Yeah, Rex Burkhead still saw the field, but he didn't get an actual carry. So the want to use him, plus the fact that the matchup is at least neutral, I think he does have a chance to crack my lineups this week.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Um, I think he could be a borderline if you're in a pinch or something like that.
Put him above J.K. Dobbins. I'd put him right around where I have David Montgomery.
Okay, sounds good.
Like
I'll put
low
him
end
right above.
RB2, tie and flex.
Yeah, I think that's a good value for Damian Pierce in this matchup. It's also worth noting that Roquan Smith didn't practice, um, dealing with a little bit of an injury. Not really a fantasy related one, but in a way it kind of is because we're talking about the running backs and their middle linebacker. But that was probably more than I thought we were going to talk about for this matchup. So I'm impressed, and you guys should be too. How much we talked about it. So all you Bears fans out there, don't be in our comments or in our DMs saying that Packers fan never talks about the Bears because we just did. But the next matchup, which going into the season might have looked better than how we feel about it now, is the Kansas City Chiefs at the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts struggling is like an understatement. They have not looked good. They could get some relief as Michael Pittman Jr. is a limited participant. Shaquille Leonard, formerly known as Darius Leonard, is a full participant in practice. So this could be the first time he plays in 2022, which would be a big bolster to their defense. Um, but with that said, outside of Jonathan Taylor and maybe Michael Pittman, if it comes out, because I feel like he's going to come down to a game time decision. That's just my gut. So if it comes out that he is not going to be limited at all, like he's a full go, he can be back in your lineups. But other than those two, there's no other Colts I think are worth mentioning.
Okay, so biggest thing I saw last week was everyone was going on the Paris Campbell's the guy you need to play if there's no Michael Pittman. Ashton Doolin is really the guy you need to play if there's no Michael Pittman. But do you even want to
Nope.
play him? Okay.
No.
Okay.
I get what you're saying, but no.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm with you. I also think no, but I just know that there was this whole Twitter following of Paris Campbell is the play this week. And yeah, you saw that works. Don't trust any other Colts if Pittman's out. Besides, obviously Jonathan Taylor. He's going to turn it around. You just got to hope this game stays at least a little bit close so he can get more carries as opposed to, I mean, he'll be using the pass game a little bit, but that's obviously not his role in that offense. We can move to the Chiefs side. Harrison Butker still has not practiced from his injury to his ankle. If you haven't already, don't waste the bench spot. Just cut him. It's not worth it. You can probably even get him back if you really want him that bad when he comes back from injury. I know in our league of record I had Harrison Butker. I don't care if I get him back or not. He's cut. He's on the waiver wire.
How about just don't play fantasy football with kickers? Then we wouldn't have to have this conversation. So, but yeah, don't waste a roster spot on a second kicker. So let's talk about more important fantasy players. The wide receivers for the Chiefs. Cole Hardman, limited. MVS and Juju on the injury report, but they are full participants. So they should have their guys heading into this week. But I think the Chiefs are very interesting that there's really, outside of Travis Kelce, which we all knew that, there really isn't a number one guy. This is really going to be a team that, each game's going to be different. The game plan, some plays will be for everybody. They're all going to be involved. And despite having, a former MVP, young, athletic quarterback out there slinging it, still putting up a ton of yards, there's not really a wide receiver I like from the Chiefs fantasy-wise.
So do you then just like take your dart throw at like a Juju or a Hardman or an MVS in a good matchup and avoid them in a tough matchup like the Indianapolis Colts? Or if you're someone that is a Juju owner, do you like throw them in your flex every single week and just say, well, could be good, this could be bad, and we're just going to roll with the tide and hope the rest of my team makes up for it?
I think if you're a Juju owner, you find the Steelers fan in your league that misses him and trade him to them. But like honestly, like MVS, Mecole Hardman, the only name that is that tempts me would be Juju, just because of what we saw in Week 1. But honestly, like I don't even know if they're rosterable. Like, you can obviously keep them, but like they're not like, this is what I'm talking about, back when we did fantasy advice. Like, some of these guys you drafted with high expectations. Don't hold on to those if you're struggling, don't be afraid to make some moves. Like, there was a lot of panic in week 1 after Devontae Smith put up a goose.
Yeah.
He
Some
bounced
people
back
even
in week
dropped
2.
him in leagues I'm in.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. So like Juju, if he's not doing it for you and you need somebody, or you're in like, you can cut him. MVS, cut him. McCole Hardman, cut him. Yes, some weeks he'll be weak. Maybe you'll want to play them in daily fantasy if you're into that. But those aren't guys that are like must stash on your roster. You don't want to get into a position where you have all these guys that you feel like you can't cut, but you're never confident starting them.
Now you see, like, I'm definitely on that boat with Hardman and MVS. I don't really have any want to hold them unless, like, say one or two of them are out that week and they have a good matchup. Then you can probably pinpoint, oh, it's probably gonna be this guy. Juju is the one I would probably hold on my roster and just take the stabs at him in good matchups. So like this week, not touching him. Indianapolis is a solid defense. They go against the Jets this year. I'm not really sure what their schedule looks like. Then like I would throw Juju out there saying I hope it's a Juju week,
All
because
right.
you have a good chance to pop a 20. But he's the one person I would stash on my roster just for
All right.
those games. Maybe you need a bye week fill. The other two, I agree with you. I would cut ties and not worry about it.
All right. So I'm going to follow that up with, which divisional team do you think is a good matchup? And then
Yeah, there really
is it
isn't
worth
one.
holding? That's already, I mean, they've already played one, or
Mhm.
they played one. Or
I
no, they
mean,
played two.
Vegas is the best matchup of the three, probably. I don't know. That's still tough. That's still not a game I necessarily want to touch.
Right. And that's already 7 games because they've already played the Chargers. Like,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm saying, like, don't hold on to hope. If you want to keep them, if you have a stronger feeling in your gut than I do, like we always say, go with your gut. But that's just our thoughts. But let's talk about like the best offense in the NFL, and then like maybe the best offense in the NFL. And if you don't know what we're talking about, it is the divisional matchup of the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. And we're going to start with the Buffalo Bills because I want to save the Dolphins. Josh Allen in your lineup, Stephon Diggs in your lineup, Gabe Davis, if he goes, he says he's going to play. He's listed as limited. Sometimes players get a little too hard, or, think they're going to play and the medical staff pulls him out. But he should be good to go. 1:00 game. You'll know early enough to make that decision. If he's in your lineup. Dawson Knox, I like him this week. So I think if you need a tight end dart throw, or if you just, want a piece of that high-powered offense, you can start him. The running backs, there's still not one that has sold me on Buffalo that I would play. George, any thoughts on Buffalo other than what I said?
Man, can Zach Moss just be gone? Like, I've liked Zach Moss at times, but like, I feel like there'd be a running back or both that's worth playing if Zach Moss was gone. But instead, Zach Moss just muddies the water enough that none of them get anything going. So no, you hit the nail on the head. I'm avoiding Singletary, who's probably your best option whenever possible, and the other guys, anyone involved in that passing game, yeah, sure, throw a stab at it.
All right, so we got to talk about the Miami Dolphins. And just like the Buffalo Bills, there's not a lot to talk about. Jalen Waddle, though, Tyreek Hill, they are in your lineup. I think I saw a crazy stat that through the first 2 weeks, those two have seen like 87% of targets. The number might not be exactly right, but that's the number that I'm recalling. I should have saved that stat from when I saw it. But 87% of targets has gone to either Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. With that amount of volume, they're every week starters. We knew Tyreek Hill most likely was be. We were concerned about Jalen Waddle, but I think we've seen that these two guys, they can both be in your lineups every week. I can see George ferociously looking at something up, so I'll keep talking about the
No,
Dolphins
keep talking.
players.
Yeah.
Mike Gesicki, he did catch a touchdown, which was nice to see, but I still would not put him in my lineup. And then the other guy I want to talk about is Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds. I still like Chase Edmonds. I know George is going to like Raheem Mostert. But I
Hmm.
don't like him enough to play either of them in this matchup because the Bills have only given up 17 points so far this season. This is an extremely tough defense. It'll be a great test for these wide receivers. It's also why, despite the big game last week, I do not think Tua should be a streaming option.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. I am definitely more Mostert than Edmonds, but I'm not putting either of them in my lineup. I kind of went speculative ad on Mostert this week because that usage was a little bit shocking when you look at it. But no, I was looking up the Bills injury report because I did see a little bit of pushback on social media for your sit of Tua in your article this week, and it is that the Bills secondary is beat up. Micah Hyde did not practice on Thursday. Dane Jackson probably is not playing after his horrific looking neck injury that he is actually luckily okay. And Jordan Poyer, their other safety, went from a limited to a did not practice from Wednesday to Thursday. So they might be down 3 starting pieces in their secondary. Does that change your mind at all on Atua?
No, it doesn't.
And why?
Because I think the Bills defense, I understand what you're saying about the secondary, but they do it on all 3 phases. And similar to what I talked about with, the Browns when I was joking, or the Jets, I'm sorry, because they played the Browns. They came back from a huge deficit, AFC opponent, big win. A lot of times after a huge win that you're not expecting or you get really excited for, it's hard to follow that up with the same level. Now, yes, I think I even put in the article, it's, I understand the temptation, because Bills are on a short week. Like everything is lining up for, Tua should have another good week. But there is just something about this matchup, the Bills, how well they're playing, how dominant they're looking. To hold a team under 17 in any week is impressive. To go 2 weeks with only allowing 17 points is even more impressive. So Tua
Against
scares
two
me.
playoff teams last year,
Yeah,
one
yes,
the Super
playoff
Bowl
teams,
champion.
Super Bowl champs, and the number 1 seed for the AFC in 2021. So it's
Yep.
not like they did it against bottom tier teams.
Mhm.
The Bills are special right now. They were special to start the last year of the season. Like they look like the team of destiny, but the big question is, will they be able to finish strong, or will it come down to a heartbreaking coin flip in the playoffs?
I'm with you. Just one more shot on the Dolphins before we move on. We'll take it quick. Mike Gesicki scored a touchdown last week. Everyone's starting to clamor about him again. Are you still completely out?
Yes, you were looking up stats. I did say that already.
Okay. Got you. Sorry about that. And we'll move on then. Detroit Lions against the Minnesota Vikings. We can start on the Viking side where there's no real injuries. I know Justin Jefferson really had a bad week last week, but he still had a ton of targets. The Eagles just kind of suffocated them. I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson. Same with Dalvin Cook, actually, too.
No, it was primetime Kirk.
That's
Like
very
there
true.
was, it was primetime Kirk. It was a perfect example of primetime Kirk. So I have no fear. Oh, you definitely not. Justin Jefferson is in your lineup every week. I don't care if he comes off a bad game. I don't care if he puts up 40 points and you're worried he's not going to repeat. He's in your lineup every week. Um, what were your thoughts though on Madison? It's weird that he's only number 2 now instead of 25, but
Yes.
I feel like he's getting more carries than in the years past. Not where I'm not like not playing Dalvin Cook, but it's caught me off guard over the last 2 weeks than um what we've been used to before the new head coach in Minnesota.
The new head coach is exactly where I was going to go with that. So, like, it's a new system that they have in there. We were worried a little bit about Dalvin Cook coming in because we know, like, we are they going to completely flip this thing on its head? Like, but it's been pretty much your same traditional Vikings offense through the first 2 weeks. It's just last week they happened to struggle, but I kind of like it as a Dalvin Cook owner because we're always expecting the whole he's going to be out for 2-3 weeks randomly throughout the season because he has this huge workload. He's going to get banged up. It's going to be done. Maybe he can stay healthy for maybe only miss one game, maybe be the whole season because they're going to keep him out a little bit more. And he's still talented enough and still getting enough of a workload every week to still be Dalvin Cook. So I like it actually.
Yeah, all right. I think you made a really good point that I didn't think about with, maybe that saves him long term, or maybe Madison in the second half of the season doesn't get as many carries as they make a playoff push. Um, Irv Smith Jr. if you need a dart throw, I think it's worth mentioning because the Lions, they put up a lot of points, but they've given up a lot of points too. I know Irv Smith hurt George in week 1. That's why there was a little bit of a sigh if you're listening closely. But I think he can be
Yes.
there. And Adam Thielen, it is a positive matchup. He hasn't been the Adam Thielen we're used to. If you're desperate, if we're talking, like I would still probably go, guys we've already talked about, I'd still probably play Adam Thielen over a Jacoby Myers,
Mhm.
over a Robbie Anderson. But I completely understand if you're like, nope, I want a little bit more upside, and you're just going to hope that he catches a touchdown. That's kind of where I'm at with Adam Thielen. I think he's on my sit list for the couchgms.com. So it's those very low tier flexible options. And it would be a flex. There's plenty of other wide receiver options. It's so deep um, that I would play over him.
Exactly. He's not quite the Adam Thielen we're used to seeing the last few years. He's slowly kind of working his way down those point scoring boards as Justin Jefferson rises and as their offense changes around him a little bit. But not a bad flex if you're desperate. I think that's it for Lions Vikings. Let's move on to
Well,
the Las Vegas
real quick.
Raiders. Oh, okay,
We
go
didn't even
ahead.
talk about the Lions. We just talked about the Vikings the
Oh,
whole time. Well, we
my
should talk about
bad.
the Lions because they're the second highest scoring team, like I mentioned. But we'll go through it real quick. Amon St. Brown, you can play him until further notice.
Yep.
DeAndre Swift, you can play him as long as he's active. He is feeling better. But just check your waiver wires, make sure Jamal Williams isn't available, and pick him up. And if he doesn't go, you can cut him or something like that. Just because he already gets targets and he'll get or more opportunities if he doesn't go. And then T.J. Hawkinson is limited in practice. He's expected to go this week. He's kind of just like a precautionary thing. But if he isn't able to, you might have to pivot to another dartboard throw. So that was the Lions real quick. So George, why don't we move on now, like you wanted to I think my favorite 1:00 game.
Yeah.
And that is because the Las Vegas Raiders are 0-2 and the Tennessee Titans are 0-2. And I want to see which team responds. The Raiders lost in heartbreak fashion. The Titans got embarrassed on Monday Night Football. Hunter Renfrow, who had the fumble, is DNPing with a concussion. Devontae Adams only got 2 catches in week 2. That has to be rectified. Like the Raiders looked like they won the game in the fourth quarter when the fourth quarter started, and then they lost in overtime, which was kind of crazy. And the Titans looked like they forgot there was a game. So for me, I think in terms of fantasy, I like Derek Carr as a streaming option this week. Devontae's in
Mhm.
your lineup. I don't like any of the Raiders quarterbacks. Or I'm sorry, I did
Running
Raiders
backs.
running backs. And then Darren Waller, he's still producing. We were worried about that to start the
Yep.
season. He's still a tight end that you can rely on. Titans, I know Derrick Henry hasn't been producing, but he's still in your lineups. And then is there really anyone like, are you in on the Traylon Burks or the Robert Woods or the Nick Westbrook Akina?
No.
Okay,
No.
me neither.
No, I mean the thing is, like, even if they are producing decently as a team in the passing game, they're spreading the ball out so much because of what they've got to work with that none of the individual receivers are going to be good. I'm also out on Austin Hooper. Like, he might have a good week here or there, but as of now, until he starts like showing me more consistency, I'm not throwing him even on a dartboard yet.
Yeah, I'm with you. So in terms of this game, I think it's gonna be really fun. I think it's gonna be a hard fought, really good matchup to watch. But in terms of fantasy, there's just not a lot of guys, or should I put this guy on my flex? If they're on the Raiders or the Titans, probably not,
Probably
unfortunately.
not.
So George,
Um,
talk about the last game and your second favorite team.
We got the Carson Wentz revenge game. The Eagles traveling to the Washington Commanders. I'll just knock the Eagles out here really fast. Should be at least a neutral matchup for the Eagles. So definitely AJ Brown's in your lineup. I don't have any problem with starting Devontae Smith now, seeing that they're getting involved in the offense again. Dallas Goddard is still probably your solid tier 2 tight end, and Jalen Hurts is pretty good. When it comes to the running backs, I'm surprised to see how much of a workload Miles Sanders is getting. And Miles Sanders has definitely crept into your sit in every week running back 2 now, as long as this keeps up and he can stay healthy. So a lot of fantasy options from the Eagles. I was not expecting this offense to be as prolific as it was so far, but we'll see if they keep it up.
For sure. I think you did a really good job, talking about the Eagles and the guys you like, and I'm right there with you. So I think the Commanders are a little bit more of the surprise. One being that Carson Wentz, I believe, is top 3 in passing yards and top 5 in fantasy to start the season.
Yep.
If who saw that coming? Not I.
Nope.
But that Eagles secondary is legit. Their front 7 is legit. This is not a great matchup. It is in Washington, so it's not he won't be like completely booed out of the stadium like we expect when he returned to the link for the later this year. But I'm still not playing Carson Wentz. He's another guy I put on the sit list. And then I talked about their secondary, picking which wide receiver you trust, if you trust any of them. Curtis Samuel has been like the surprise. Terry McLaurin was the high draft pick, and then Jahan Dotson has 3 touchdowns now through 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like they've all been producing in some way, but it's like, are they all out of our lineups this week?
The only one, okay, I want to see if you're as shocked as you were the first time I said this. The only one I'm thinking about is Curtis Samuel. The Eagles' 2 best corners play outside. Avonte Maddox is solid in the slot, but that's where you're going to be matched up with Curtis Samuel. And Curtis Samuel has also been the volume monster so far. He's led the team in targets both weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd rather, in a tough matchup, take the one guy who's getting fed the most because he has the most chance of getting extra catches, getting that touchdown throw. And Jahan Dotson, as much as I like him as a rookie, he's still a little bit of a smokescreen because of those 3 touchdowns. He's been touchdown dependent. You just don't notice it because he's only gotten touchdowns. And Terry McLaurin, I've always been sketchy on. I'd rather stay away from it and take the target guy in Samuel.
All right, so real quick, from the 1:00 games, Samuel or Juju Smith-Schuster?
Give me Samuel.
Samuel or Rashad Bateman?
Slightly in Bateman.
Samuel or Jacoby Myers?
Samuel.
Samuel or Jarvis Landry?
Samuel.
Samuel or what's the very first game we did? I think I hit them all. Tyler Boyd. We'll just throw that one in there because that's the game we did.
Oh, yeah, that's Samuel.
Okay.
If the Bengals were on a roll, maybe Boyd, but no, not yet. No.
All right, so that wraps up the 1:00 games. So let's get into the 4:00 games. We'll start with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Los Angeles Chargers. Charger Nation could breathe a sigh of relief, even though Herbert probably is not breathing the best right now as he's dealing with that cracked rib.
Ouch.
I'm just being honest. Like I thought
You're
about it in my head. I was
right.
like, that's kind of but he's expected to practice, or he was practicing and he's expected to play. Keenan Allen is limited, so he could be back. It's still unknown. If Keenan Allen is back, I think you can play him. I think you can play Mike Williams. I still think he's a safe guy. And then Gerald Everett, I think he is officially a full-time member of the fantasy dartboard, and he's pretty high up there because it's such a high-powered offense. And then you have Austin Eckler, which the dude hasn't been what we expected, but he is still their number one guy. He is producing. He just hasn't scored. I am a little bit concerned about how much Sony Michel has been used in the red zone when Austin Eckler dominated in the red zone last year. So that's just something to keep an eye on, but not worth taking out of my lineup yet.
The touches is why you can't be worried about Austin Eckler yet. Like, the man got 10 targets last week, 14 carries. It's just, the red zone's going to hurt. He's going to be one of those guys that's going to get touchdown zapped from him, and that is going to be the big reason why he doesn't perform up to his first round grade and up to where he was playing last year. But he's still going to be good enough that you can't freak out and be mad because he's not getting first round value, because he's still giving you starting running back value.
I agree. And on the Jacksonville side, we made fun of it when it happened, but Christian Kirk has so far lived up to his contract. It is still early, but Christian Kirk targets, points, yards, touchdowns. He's doing it all. He is their number one guy, and he can be in your starting lineup, even in a, minus matchup against the Chargers. They're going to have to move the ball. And Lawrence has started to look his way. So I really like Christian Kirk. Great job to anyone that drafted him later in the rounds. But the big question that comes up with the Jaguars every week was going to be James Robinson, Travis Etienne, or both. And George, I feel like I know your answer, but I'm going to ask you anyways.
You don't know my answer. Jaguars are facing a really good offense this time. I think they're going to be more behind. I'm going to give that dip away from Robinson this week, and I'm going to go ETN.
I thought you were going to go both. That was going to be my guess.
No, I'm thinking closer game. I like Robinson maybe slightly, but you could go both. In a game that I'm expecting them to be down, they should be using ETN more.
I like it. Yeah, they got to get him more involved. He's such a playmaker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so weird seeing number 39 Jamal Agnew out there as like a legit wide receiver option for them.
Yep.
Like, get the ball into ETN's hand. Like, use your playmakers. But that's enough for that matchup. You know, a big divisional matchup for the Los Angeles Rams against the Arizona Cardinals, who came back in dramatic fashion to beat the Raiders last week. We'll start with them. James Conner left the game, did not practice. He kept his helmet on, so that everyone thought that was like a good sign. They were kind of being safe with him. If he doesn't go, it's not the best matchup. Are you instantly inserting Darrell Williams, or is he more of a guy that you grabbed in case this is a long-term injury?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I'm probably in the borderline flex category with Darrell Williams. I'd probably play him over a J.K. Dobbins if we just want to throw that idea out there, but not confidently. If the matchup was better, I think it's a pretty solid sold. I kind of mentioned it in my waiver wire article earlier. I like the fact that he became the traditional running back once Connor left, which is why I like him better than Benjamin right off the bat. Benjamin's going to get more work than he did with James Conner in there, but still the number of touches to be a solid fantasy play should go to Darrell Williams.
I think that's some good advice. And then Zach Ertz, who is DNP, but that was his his veteran rest essentially. He should be good to go, and he'll be in your lineup. Hollywood Brown, he's taking a drink, so I'm going to say he's saying no.
No, definitely not. I just don't feel confident enough in any of these Cardinals wide receivers right now. Inconsistency to put him out there again in a bad matchup against the Rams. Maybe we'll revisit this when they visit them again later in the year when we have DeAndre Hopkins back. Maybe Hopkins will give this team a spark in a few weeks. Until then, we're not getting the Marquise Brown that we hoped for when we drafted him. That's going to be this monster in the first 7 weeks. We're getting more of the inconsistent Marquise Brown from 2 years ago in Baltimore.
Alrighty, so let's pivot to the Rams. Cooper Kupp, are you starting him? Absolutely.
Never. Absolutely not. Yes, we're starting Cooper Kupp everywhere.
Yeah, we just lost all our recognition or believability after that. It was sarcastic. You're starting Cooper Kupp. Tyler Higbee is definitely on the tight end dartboard this week. I think he's actually pretty high on it. Allen Robinson, they're trying to get this guy the ball. He got in the end zone last week. I'd still put him out there over some of the guys we mentioned. I'd play him over Curtis Samuel if we're going back to that one. So I would play Allen Robinson. Matt Stafford, I think, is a good play. And then both running backs. Darrell Henderson is still my favorite for now, but they are getting Cam Akers more and more opportunities. So that's something to monitor, 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. Cam Akers is getting more involved. Will he ever overtake Darrell Henderson this season? That's yet to be seen. But we could get, closer to what we saw last year out of Denver and a true 50-50 split.
I'm intrigued that you're saying, I guess Henderson was the more effective, but Cam Akers had 5 more carries than Darrell Henderson last week. Like, part of it you could argue maybe because they were up and they kind of lost that lead. Maybe it was like, oh yeah, we're going to try to feed Akers here and see if we can get him rolling. But I have a feeling that they're really trying to turn the offense back to him, similar to what they were doing in the playoffs last year, even though it wasn't working. If it keeps not working, this could all be void. But he got enough volume last week that I'm thinking if you're desperate for a flex, you could stick him in your lineup. I'm still trying to bench him, hold for another week or two, but I want to see him get another 15 carries this week and next week. And then we'll see how that production lines up to should we play him, shouldn't we play him.
Yeah, and it's still worth noting that Darrell Henderson did outsnap him, but it was 56 to 43% of snaps. So very close. We're getting closer to that 50-50 split.
Okay.
And I do think some of that was because they were up until they were almost out. But let's talk about the team that they almost lost to, the Atlanta Falcons. They're heading to Seattle. Tough draw for them to have to go from Atlanta to LA, then Atlanta to Seattle back to back weeks. So a lot of traveling. But there's no notable injuries for this game. So my only question is, because you could probably just tell me to like listen to last week's show, which I highly recommend you doing. But give me the spoiler edition of Kyle Pitts. Are you panicking?
Tyler said he was not panicking because a lot of these other higher end tight ends aren't performing up to the level that they should be, which is a fair argument. I am panicking on Kyle Pitts because he is not even getting the targets, the looks in the offense. He's been completely invisible. And they're still putting up points. So almost I'm thinking, why should they change what they're doing if they're not targeting him and they're still putting up points and it's working? They want to focus more on the run game with their rushing quarterback. Drake London is working very well so far. I am avoiding Kyle Pitts in my lineup until I see him do it. And last year, the argument we actually saw was he put up 1,000 yards. He only had 3 games in double digits in fantasy all year. 3 games. That's it.
Yeah, I that's a great point because I was about to say, well, I'd still keep him in my lineup because of the upside, and the tight end position is so poor. So if you want to take that approach, I don't think it's a bad one because
Yeah.
who you're going to pick up off the waiver wires that can give you the same amount of production. Unless if you can go out and get a Gerald Everett, I might start him over Kyle Pitts just because of what we've seen. But the name you brought up, Drake London, has been their number one guy. He
Mm-hmm.
37% of the time they throw a ball, it goes to Drake London. That is the highest of any wide receiver in the NFL. Higher than
And that's
Cooper Kupp.
Stephon Diggs getting 4 touchdowns and
That's
that's
higher than Stephon
crazy.
Diggs. That's where they're at. Like they are force feeding Drake London. So I do think it is scary. I understand the upside with Pitts and the poor tight end position. But get Drake London in your starting lineups.
That honestly makes me feel confident putting Drake London almost in the same category as an Amon St. Brown. You didn't expect him maybe to be a flex, maybe to be a bench guy you play on matchups, and now all of a sudden it's like he's getting the volume, he's getting the production. You can put him in your lineup every week. Yeah.
He's definitely trending in that direction. Not the best matchup though. Like if you have to, you could play Cordell Patterson. I might pivot away from the Seattle Seahawks. They're not the best in offense, but their defense has still been pretty decent. I mean, they held they held the Broncos. That was the Broncos moved the ball decently, but and I can't remember who they played. I'm doing a terrible job at.
San Francisco.
Thank you.
To
Which they limited.
27 though.
Yeah, but that game kind of was completely changed once Jimmy G got in. So I'm not saying it's a terrible matchup. Like it's like a middle of the line. If you don't love Cordell Patterson, you can go a different option because you probably have some guys. He's not a must start, but I think he's a solid option if you need it. But yeah, and then on the Seattle side, Kenneth Walker was back. He didn't really do much, but look for him to eat into Rashad Penny as they get him more involved into the offense. DK is the guy that you play every week that you don't love, and then Tyler Lockett is one of those guys that I talked about at the beginning that like you're holding on to the name value, you're holding on to the draft stock, but like, is he cuttable?
Man, this offense is not prolific. I kind of talked about Tyler with Tyler a little bit. Like is it a DK week or is it a Lockett week still happening? Similar to what we're talking about with Kansas City. So that's why it's a good comparison. But I'm going to take the guy with the highest upside, keep him. That's the DK. And I'm going to cut ties with the other one. So I'm still like Lockett's getting more production than I expected him to so far. But I don't want any part of it because of the inconsistency and the having to guess when.
Gotcha. I think that's a good point. So let's talk about probably the game of the week that we, at least that's how it's going to be branded when you have two Hall of Fame quarterbacks facing off, even though there's 20 other players on the field. But Green Bay Packers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And let's just start with the injuries to the wide receiver position. I'll start with the Packers, okay? Did not practice on Thursday. Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard, Sammy Watkins, Christian Watson. On the Buccaneers side, did not practice. Chris Godwin. Limited practice. Rashad Perryman. Julio Jones was also did not practice, and Russell Gage was a limited participant. And there's no Mike Evans.
Mm-hmm.
So between Leonard Fournette and those two running backs in Green Bay, there might be 200 attempts because there's just not a lot of pass catching options. And unfortunately, the Buccaneers are really good against the run.
Yeah.
So I'm very scared as a Packers fan. Like, I still think this team is good enough to win the game. But in terms of fantasy, there is not a single Packers player I like playing this week. I'm still going to play Aaron Jones. I'd probably still play Aaron or AJ Dillon.
Yep.
But I don't like it. But they have the potential to go up, but I don't like it. And then one more stat I just have to give to you, which is like the weirdest thing in all of football, is like Aaron Rodgers is really bad playing in Tampa Bay. This is only his 5th game, but he's 1-3 with 909 yards. That's only a 227 yard per game average. 3 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. My basic math is that's 11% of his career interceptions have come in those 4 games in Tampa Bay.
Well, I mean, this guy throws 3 interceptions a year, it seems like. So that's probably part of that reason. But no, yeah, there's literally 3 guys that I'm playing in this matchup in fantasy. And it is not Aaron Rodgers. It is not Tom Brady. It is Leonard Fournette, Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon. Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are going to get involved in the passing game because there's no one else to catch the ball there. And the Packers are still going to get some yards. So that's why I'm not super worried about the running backs. They might be limited in the actual rushing stats, but they're going to get involved in the passing game. I guess maybe you could throw a random dart out for a Robert Tonyan, but I'm trying to avoid that. And then on the Buccaneers side, I mean, the only guy I said that maybe I'd want to play is Rashad Perryman. If he's still banged up, don't trust it enough. They signed Cole Beasley. He's not going to be in the building long enough. Like, no, this is a great game on paper until you realize that nobody important is playing at the pass catching positions.
Yeah, even their rookie Cade Otton, he hasn't practiced the last 2 days. That's a personal reason, though, so it's not injury related. Scotty Miller, he was a full participant on Thursday, but he was still on the injury report. So there's so many injuries to go around. This game could be ugly. I mean, surprise, surprise, it probably won't be just because that's how the NFL likes to work. But this game could be ugly on the 4 o'clock window. Just not a lot of options for me. If you are playing daily fantasy, though, and all the Packers players I just listed, you might want to throw, something to get a really cheap guy in Romeo Doubs.
Yeah.
Just not in your lineups, like don't even go out and pick him up in a redraft league. But in daily fantasy, if you want to get some higher end players and you need a cheap option, just because of they need somebody, you might want to go Romeo Doubs.
I'm with you, and I would only touch him in daily fantasy. Or if you're a really weak dynasty team that's trying to, just pick up the pieces and you drafted him, yeah, sure, throw him out there for that. But that's enough of that game. We can move on to Sunday Night Football. The San Francisco 49ers, the band is back together with Jimmy G, going against the struggling in coaching, struggling in time management Denver Broncos. I'll start on the 49ers side because I feel like it's way more exciting. On top of having Garoppolo back at quarterback, Kittle is looking good so far to play. He was limited participant so far this week in practices. I think he's going to be good to go. If anything changes on that, I will let you know on Twitter because it is obviously a Sunday night game. That would be a tough fill if he does not go. But I'm pretty confident in that one. And I give everyone a little bump because Garoppolo's in there. I kind of gave you the reasons already, so I won't go back through it. But I love playing Deebo Samuel even more. I would probably think about Ayuk as a potential flex. Kittle's obviously good to go. And Jeff Wilson.
Yeah, I think what we had to hit on is one, the Kittle one is very concerning to me because you have to know Sunday, like you need Schefter to put it out Sunday, the early games that Kittle's going to play. You need Rappaport, Pelissero to do that because you would hate, I mean, it's the tight end position. So like if you have to pivot to a Ross Dwelly or an Albert O.
Alberto, I'm thinking is your best option if you want to handcuff yourself.
Right. But that's going to be tough. I do like Jeff Wilson. He's just going to be the guy. Like, it's not going to be pretty,
Mm-hmm.
but they lost Tyrion Davis Prince. They added Marlon Mack to the active roster. You know, nothing special. Jordan Mason maybe is a name you'll just keep an eye on to see if he overtakes it all, but he was still an undrafted rookie. And they like Jeff Wilson, so he's going to be the guy, not that high explosive player you're hoping for, but he could get you through something until Elijah Mitchell gets back. And then the last thing I'll mention on the 49ers is Brandon Ayuk, I do think gets a little bit of an uptick on, availability just because we expect the ball to be passing more. And I actually still have two more things to talk about the 49ers. One, we didn't do quotes of the week this week, but I did love after the game, Kyle Shanahan did say, looked good, looked handsome. Like, that's how he was asked about Jimmy G. Might not have been after the game, might have been on his Wednesday press conference. And
Yeah, I think
then
it was after quotes of the week. We did do quotes of the week, but did not. That one didn't.
I meant on this
Unfortunately,
episode.
have
You
it
did it
on
on
the.
last week's
Yeah,
episode,
yeah.
or the show earlier this week. And then my last thing is, just because I wasn't on Tuesday, I do want to talk about Trey Lance real quick, and I'll make it quick. I promise. There's not a bigger Trey Lance fan on this podcast or a non 49ers Trey Lance fan than me. And this injury is devastating, not only for him as a guy that we expected big things from, definitely hoping that he has a quick recovery, but he will now after not playing last year, being the backup, really only playing a game and a quarter this year. And because of COVID, he went to North Dakota State. They only played one game that year. So he'll be going 3 years without playing extended football, which I think could affect his development. So, maybe a guy I don't know if you can, but you might try to move in Dynasty or something like that, just because there's a lot of unknowns around it, and it's a pretty big injury for him to come back on. But I wanted to give my thoughts on Trey Lance since I have been the biggest supporter of him, and I missed the show on Tuesday. But the Denver Broncos,
Yep.
I wish Snyder was here because I did listen to part of the podcast. I didn't make it all the way through, since I missed it, and he called Nathaniel Hackett the worst coach he's ever seen. And I understand the heat, but I just need you to relax. He also prefaced it by, I don't really know his background. Well, he is the mastermind behind making Blake Bortles look decent and get him to an AFC Championship game. So he knows what he's doing. But I understand there's been the concerns about the timeouts and the delay of games. Part of that is on Russell Wilson too. Like, he has every right to call a timeout or, not snap the ball early. And two, it wasn't talked about much, but something that kind of got overlooked this offseason was their offensive coordinator, who, Getsy Hackett calls the plays. Their offensive coordinator was never an offensive coordinator before. Nathaniel Hackett, never a head coach before. Offensive coordinator, but never head coach. Their defensive coordinator, never a defensive coordinator. They have a lot of young minds. They just need time to gel. They're going to get there. They're going to bounce back. This Broncos team is going to be okay. It might not be this year. They might not make the playoffs, but I promise you, Nathaniel Hackett will get it under control, and this Bronco team will be okay. But in terms of this matchup, Jerry Jeudy, still questionable.
If he goes.
Which means Courtland Sutton is the guy, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then Javonte Williams. I think he's good enough to play. Melvin Gordon, they actually kind of split last week. It seemed like Javonte was going to be the running back. Melvin Gordon was still on the field, still got a little bit. But in a good matchup, I think I would hold off on Melvin Gordon and just rely on Javonte.
Yeah, he was there. They were both affected, but Javonte still led in carries. Like, the split is going the way we hoped it would at the start of the season. Like, they were literally truly 50-50 last year. It is definitely looking like it's 60-40, 65-35 in favor of Javonte this year, which gives him just that extra boost in fantasy you need to be confident starting every single week. I think that locks up pretty much everyone from that game. So we got one more game to talk about before we get out of here. I know we're running long. Dallas Cowboys against the New York Giants. What an exciting Monday night football game. And even better, Dalton Schultz has not practiced this week.
Yeah, I need everyone listening. We're already going long, so we're just going to have to. I need everyone listening to close their eyes. and
I'll
think
join him. Okay.
about the Monday night showdown between Cooper Rush and Daniel Jones lighting up the field on Monday Night Football. It's not that exciting. It really isn't. You can open your eyes now because you're probably like falling asleep thinking about the game.
There's some good ASMR there, yeah.
I appreciate it. I don't really know if that's technically ASMR because I was talking. I wasn't just making sounds, but that's a debate
It was
for
a little
not this
whisper.
podcast.
It was relaxing, and then what you were saying was also very relaxing because I don't want to watch it when I go to bed with it. So,
all right. So the Giants, you can play Saquon. I think. I mean, you're going to play Saquon. Not I think. You're going to play Saquon. The Cowboys side about it. Noah Brown. He's the name I do want to ask you about. Dalton Schultz. I think I mentioned it. Like, I think you're pulling him out of your lineup because I don't know who the backup is without Googling it on either team. Blake Jarwin's still not there, right?
No.
As George Googles it.
No, I'm not Googling. I'm literally looking to see if they had I was trying to look at some targets and stuff from last week. Is Dennis Houston a tight end? I don't know. He had a target last week. I don't know who that is.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, Dalton Schultz, even though, like, again, unless you get that early tweet from one of the main guys or from the Couch GMs Twitter, turn those notifications on. Like, there's no one on the Cowboys I really want to play.
CD Lamb, is he the one?
I mean, you're probably going to have to play him just because of the upside. He's very similar to what I said about Aaron Jones. Like, I'm going to play Aaron Jones. We just saw what he did in week 2. I drafted him to play him every week. He did the same thing with CeeDee Lamb, but it's not a guy that you're going to feel great about.
Yep. It's about right. I don't think I feel too great about anybody in this Monday night game, but that's about it. It's Saquon and CeeDee Lamb.
All right, so their backup tight end for Dallas, if you do play Dalton Schultz and need a guy, his name is Jake Ferguson, former Wisconsin Badger. And then on the Giants, I can't even name their starter because it's not Kyle Rudolph anymore, and it's changed. I don't think it's...
Kind of say the name. I think I know it, but...
All right, I'm going to say the name. The name is Daniel Bellinger.
Yep.
Followed by Tanner Hudson as his backup. So you don't want to have
That's
to get
not even the guy who had the touchdown, I think, for the Giants either.
Yeah, I don't know. It's rough.
They're a mess. They're an absolute mess. At anyone besides Saquon, because obviously Saquon's the guy.
They're a mess, but undefeated. So it's very weird.
Yeah. Chris Myrick is the guy I was thinking of. That's what I thought you were going to say.
He's number 3.
Yeah.
They're not even playing Kenny Golladay in the starting role. Yeah, it's just a mess. Like, this Monday night game, like, watch it be game of the year just because we're not expecting anything.
And it's divisional.
Cowboys
Giants games are all competitive.
Right. Not what they were probably hoping for when they scheduled this game. Not great for fantasy. Hopefully you don't have anyone playing unless you have Saquon Barkley and your matchups are wrapped up on Sunday night, and you can either watch this game sad or happy that you won your fantasy matchup. But George has already mentioned a couple times, and I definitely talked way too long. We're going long. I hope you did enjoy the show. As always, we thank you for listening. And remember that we are here to help you guys. Send us questions. We put out a tweet on Twitter and on Facebook, all the social media channels at the Couch GM that you can reply to for your game day questions, game day start sits. Get involved. This podcast is more fun for us and more fun for you when you get involved.
Yes, it is, Cody. Thank you one more time for listening into that Couch GMs podcast. For Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see y'all next week.
Ooh. Nice.